What happens when a middle-aged pilot with unconventional ideas transforms a medium bomber into a flying gunship that rewrites the rules of aerial warfare? Picture the Southwest Pacific Theater in 1942, where American forces were struggling to interdict Japanese supply convoys, reinforcing their garrisons across thousands of miles of ocean. Standard bombing tactics, high-altitude precision drops, proved ineffective against moving ships that could maneuver away from falling bombs. Medium bombers like the B25 Mitchell, designed for strategic targets, seemed ill-suited for maritime interdiction. Japanese convoys sailed with relative impunity, delivering troops, supplies, and equipment that sustained their defensive perimeter. American commanders desperately sought solutions to this tactical problem, but conventional thinking offered only refinements to approaches that weren't working. Into this frustrating situation came Captain Paul I. Pappy Gunn, a 43-year-old pilot whose civilian career in commercial aviation and practical engineering background gave him perspectives that younger, more conventionally trained officers lacked. Gunn looked at the B-25 Mitchell medium bomber and saw not a strategic bombing platform, but a potential close support attack aircraft that could devastate enemy shipping through overwhelming forward firepower. His vision was radical. Strip out unnecessary equipment, add forward-firing guns, lots of them, and attack ships at mast-height altitude, where bombs would skip across water like stones, and concentrated machine gun fire would shred superstructures, kill crew, and start fires that would sink vessels or render them combat ineffective. When Gunn proposed his modifications to skeptical superiors, they dismissed the concept as impractical, dangerous, and contrary to established bomber doctrine. Bombers were supposed to operate at altitude, using their bomb sights for precision attacks. Converting a B-25 into what Gunn envisioned would waste a perfectly good medium bomber by transforming it into a low-altitude gunship that violated every principle of strategic air power. The aircraft would be vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. The modifications would be difficult to implement under field conditions. The whole concept seemed like the fantasy of someone who didn't understand proper bomber employment. Gunn's ideas were noted and ignored, filed away, as the kind of well-meaning but misguided suggestions that headquarters received regularly from field personnel who didn't appreciate the bigger picture. Then Gunn, with the tacit support of sympathetic officers and the assistance of talented mechanics and armorers, began modifying B-25s according to his vision. Working under difficult conditions with limited resources, his team installed additional forward-firing machine guns, eventually creating configurations with up to 14 guns pointing forward. They developed skip bombing techniques where bombs released at extremely low altitude would bounce across the water surface before striking ships at the waterline. They tested these modifications in combat, attacking Japanese convoys with devastating results. Ships that had previously required multiple bombing runs to damage were torn apart in single passes by the combined effect of skip bombs and concentrated machine gun fire. Japanese sailors who survived these attacks reported terror at facing what seemed like flying fortresses that could shred entire vessels in seconds. The stunning success of Gunn's modified B-25s, aircraft that came to be known as commerce destroyers or strafers, forced official recognition of what one unconventional thinker had accomplished through persistence, technical skill, and willingness to challenge established doctrine. This is the story of how Pappy Gunn's 14-gun B-25 monster went from ignored proposal to decisive weapon, how innovation emerged from the frustration of tactical problems that conventional approaches couldn't solve, and how one individual's vision transformed aerial warfare in the Pacific Theater. The Southwest Pacific Theater in 1942 presented unique challenges that differed fundamentally from European air operations. While the war in Europe focused on strategic bombing of industrial targets, and later on close air support for ground forces advancing across relatively compact geography, the Pacific War sprawled across vast ocean distances. Japanese forces occupied an enormous defensive perimeter, stretching from the Gilbert Islands through New Guinea, the Philippines, and up through the Marianas. This perimeter required constant resupply by ship. Troops, ammunition, food, fuel, and equipment all had to travel by sea from Japan or captured industrial centers to forward garrisons scattered across thousands of miles of ocean. American strategy recognized that interdicting these supply lines could strangle Japanese positions without the need for costly amphibious assaults on every fortified island. If convoys could be sunk or turned back, isolated Japanese garrisons would wither from lack of supplies, unable to resist when American forces eventually attacked. This strategy was sound in principle, but problematic in execution. The Pacific's vast distances meant that enemy convoys had numerous potential routes, making them difficult to locate. Weather could conceal ships for days at a time. And even when convoys were found, sinking ships with aircraft proved far more difficult than pre-war planners had anticipated. American bomber doctrine in 1942 emphasized high-altitude precision bombing. This approach worked reasonably well against stationary targets like factories, rail yards, and airbases, though even against fixed targets, accuracy was far lower than optimistic predictions suggested. Against moving ships, high-altitude bombing was nearly useless. A bomber flying at 15,000 feet released bombs that took approximately 30 seconds to fall to the surface. In those 30 seconds, a ship traveling at 15 knots could move approximately 750 feet, more than enough to evade bombs aimed at where the ship had been when weapons were released. Bombardiers attempted to lead targets, calculating where ships would be when bombs arrived, but this required accurate knowledge of target speed and heading, factors that were difficult to estimate from altitude and subject to sudden change as ships maneuvered. The US Navy's dive bombers and torpedo bombers offered alternatives for attacking shipping, but these aircraft operated primarily from carriers, which were scarce resources that couldn't be everywhere at once. Land-based Army Air Forces bombers needed to contribute to the anti-shipping campaign, but standard tactics weren't working. Numerous missions launched against Japanese convoys returned with minor damage to enemy vessels or no hits at all, having expended enormous quantities of bombs and fuel for minimal results. The operational inefficiency was staggering. Each bomber mission required ground crew time, fuel, ammunition, and risked aircraft and crew for attacks that rarely achieved significant effects. Into this frustrating tactical situation came Paul Irvin Gunn, a man whose background prepared him uniquely for the innovation he would champion. Born in 1899 in Arkansas, Gunn had served in the Navy during World War I before entering commercial aviation in the 1920s and 1930s. He flew for various airlines in the Philippines, eventually becoming operations manager for Philippine Airlines. When war came to the Pacific in December 1941, Gunn was a civilian pilot with an American wife and children in Manila. The Japanese invasion of the Philippines separated Gunn from his family, who were captured and interned, while he managed to evacuate to Australia with other American personnel. The personal stakes for Gunn were enormous. His wife and children were prisoners of the Japanese, their fate uncertain. His adopted home in the Philippines was under brutal occupation. These personal motivations, combined with professional frustration at watching inadequate tactics, fail repeatedly against Japanese convoys. Gunn was commissioned as a captain in the Army Air Forces, assigned to 5th Air Force operations in Australia and New Guinea. His practical engineering experience from years of maintaining commercial aircraft in remote locations gave him hands-on understanding of aircraft systems that most pilots lacked. His age, he was in his 40s, old enough to be called Pappy by younger officers, gave him perspective that came from experience rather than textbook learning. The B-25 Mitchell medium bomber that Gunn chose as the platform for his innovation was a capable aircraft with characteristics that made it suitable for modification. Designed by North American Aviation and entering service in 1941, the B-25 was a twin-engine bomber with crew of 6, cruising speed around 230 miles per hour, and combat radius of approximately 1,350 miles with normal bomb load. Standard armament included multiple defensive machine guns, typically in nose, dorsal turret, and tail positions, plus up to 3,000 pounds of bombs carried internally. The aircraft was sturdy, relatively easy to maintain, and available in sufficient numbers that some could be diverted from conventional bomber missions for experimental modifications. The B-25's configuration included features that facilitated Gunn's vision. Its twin engines provided good power and redundancy. The aircraft could fly on one engine if necessary. The nose section had space that could accommodate additional guns if bombardier positions were modified. The aircraft's structure was strong enough to handle the stress of low-altitude operations. Most importantly, the B-25 was stable enough for the precision flying required to execute the skip bombing tactics Gunn envisioned, where pilots would approach targets at extremely low altitude, 50 to 200 feet, and release bombs that would skip across water before striking ships. Skip bombing was not entirely new. Similar techniques had been experimented with earlier in the war. But Gunn systematized it, developing specific altitude, speed, and release point parameters that maximized effectiveness. Combined with the overwhelming forward firepower of his multi-gun configurations, skip bombing transformed the B25 from a medium bomber of questionable utility against shipping into a commerce destroyer capable of sinking or crippling vessels in single attack runs. The technique required exceptional piloting skill. Flying at mast height toward enemy ships bristling with anti-aircraft weapons demanded nerves of steel, but the results justified the risks when executed properly. The technical challenges of installing multiple forward-firing guns in a B-25 were substantial. The aircraft's nose section normally housed a bombardier with a clear plexiglass compartment for visibility and a Norden bomb sight for precision bombing. Gunn's modifications eliminated this setup, replacing it with machine gun installations. Early configurations added 4 50 caliber machine guns to the nose. Later modifications increased this to 8 or even more guns, sometimes adding additional weapons in cheek positions on the fuselage sides. The most elaborate configurations mounted 14 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns, creating a concentration of firepower unprecedented in medium bombers. Installing these weapons required more than just mounting guns. Each weapon needed ammunition supply, belts of 50 caliber rounds that had to be stored, fed reliably during sustained firing, and wouldn't jam from the vibration and G-forces of low-altitude combat maneuvering. The guns generated significant heat during firing and required cooling. The weight of guns and ammunition affected aircraft balance and performance, requiring calculations to ensure the modified aircraft remained controllable. Firing all guns simultaneously created substantial recoil that pushed back on the aircraft, a force pilots had to compensate for while maintaining precise aim. The electrical and mechanical systems that synchronized firing across multiple weapons needed to be robust and reliable. Gunn and his team, mechanics, armorers, and engineers who shared his vision, worked through these challenges through trial and error and practical problem solving. They fabricated mounting brackets from available materials. They routed ammunition feed systems through constrained spaces. They tested firing patterns to ensure convergence at effective ranges. They reinforced sections of the aircraft structure that experienced unexpected stress. This work occurred under field conditions in New Guinea and Australia, often in primitive workshops with limited tools and supplies, performed by personnel who were simultaneously maintaining operational aircraft and supporting combat missions. The achievement represented a triumph of practical engineering over resource constraints. The development occurred largely outside official channels, at least initially. Gunn didn't wait for formal approval from higher headquarters to begin his modifications. He worked with officers who had authority over small numbers of aircraft and were willing to support experimentation. He leveraged his own expertise and the skills of enlisted personnel who were frustrated with conventional tactics and eager to try something new. This approach meant working around procurement procedures, improvising with available materials, and accepting that if the modifications failed, careers including his own might suffer. But Gunn believed the potential payoff justified these risks, and events would prove him right. Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn's path to becoming one of the Pacific War's most important innovators was unconventional, shaped by experiences far removed from military aviation's typical career progression. His early life in rural Arkansas provided limited opportunities, and he left school at a young age to work various jobs. When World War I erupted, Gunn joined the U.S. Navy, serving as an enlisted man in naval aviation. This experience introduced him to aircraft and flying, sparking an interest that would define his professional life. After the war, Gunn pursued civilian aviation at a time when the industry was young, and opportunities existed for men with courage and mechanical aptitude, even if they lacked formal education. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Gunn built a career in commercial aviation, eventually settling in the Philippines, where he flew for various airlines and charter operations. He became operations manager for Philippine Airlines, a position that required not just piloting skills but also understanding of aircraft maintenance, route planning, logistics, and business operations. Gunn's work took him throughout the Philippine archipelago and across the South Pacific, giving him intimate familiarity with the geography, weather patterns, and operational conditions that would prove invaluable during the war. He married a Filipina woman, started a family, and established a life in Manila, that seemed secure and prosperous. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and simultaneous invasion of the Philippines shattered this comfortable existence. As Japanese forces advanced on Manila, American civilians were evacuated or went into hiding. Gunn managed to escape to Australia with other American personnel, but his wife and children were captured by the Japanese and placed in internment camps. The separation and uncertainty about his family's fate consumed Gunn, driving him with personal motivation that went beyond professional duty. He was fighting not just for abstract strategic objectives, but to free his family from captivity and his adopted homeland from occupation. Commissioned as a captain in the Army Air Forces, Gunn was assigned to 5th Air Force, which was responsible for air operations in the Southwest Pacific under General Douglas MacArthur's command. 5th Air Force in 1942 was a struggling organization, undersupplied, operating from primitive bases in Australia and New Guinea, facing a numerically superior and experienced Japanese enemy. The command desperately needed innovation and aggressive leadership. General George Kenney, who took command of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific in summer 1942, was receptive to unconventional ideas if they promised tactical advantages. Kenney's willingness to support innovation created an environment where Gunn's ideas could find support, despite initial skepticism from some quarters. Gunn's first innovations involved reconnaissance and transport operations, rather than combat modifications. His extensive knowledge of Pacific geography and aviation operations made him valuable for planning routes, identifying suitable airfields, and solving logistical problems that arose from operating across vast distances with limited infrastructure. But Gunn's mind was focused on the anti-shipping problem. He had witnessed the ineffectiveness of high-altitude bombing against Japanese convoys. He understood from his commercial flying experience how vulnerable ships were at close range, how devastating sustained machine gun fire could be against unarmored or lightly armored vessels, and how the combination of skip bombing and strafing might achieve what conventional bombing could not. The genesis of Gunn's multi-gun B25 concept likely emerged gradually rather than as a single flash of inspiration. He would have observed the limitations of standard B25 armament against shipping. Nose guns provided some forward firepower, but not enough to suppress anti-aircraft fire or inflict decisive damage quickly. He would have noted that ships' vulnerable points, bridge engine spaces, fuel tanks, ammunition magazines, were all above the waterline and susceptible to machine gun fire if sufficient bullets could be delivered with precision. He would have calculated that a bomber approaching at low altitude could bring multiple guns to bear on a single target, creating a stream of fire that would overwhelm defensive measures and cause catastrophic damage in seconds. The technical feasibility of his concept depended on several factors. Could sufficient guns be installed without compromising aircraft performance? Could ammunition be supplied reliably during sustained firing? Could pilots fly low enough to make skip bombing effective while surviving anti-aircraft fire? Would the modifications be reliable under combat conditions, or would guns jam, structural failures occur, or other problems render the modified aircraft more liability than asset? These questions could only be answered through testing, which required actually modifying aircraft and flying combat missions, a process that needed at least tacit approval from commanders. Gunn found allies among younger officers and experienced enlisted men who shared his frustration with conventional tactics. Major William Benn, an operations officer in 5th Air Force, recognized the potential in Gunn's ideas and provided support for initial experiments. Mechanics and armorers who worked on the modifications took professional pride in solving the technical challenges Gunn's vision presented. Pilots willing to fly the modified aircraft in combat trials were essential. Without aircrews confident in the modified B-25s and willing to execute the dangerous low-altitude attacks required for skip bombing and strafing, the concept would have remained theoretical. The first combat tests of Gunn's modified B-25s occurred in early 1943 against Japanese shipping in the waters around New Guinea and the Bismarck Sea. These early missions used aircraft with relatively modest modifications, 4 or 6 forward-firing guns rather than the eventual 14. But even these configurations proved devastatingly effective. Pilots approached ships at extremely low altitude, released bombs that skipped across water and struck at or near the waterline, then maintained their approach while firing all forward guns. The concentration of 50 caliber fire, each gun firing approximately 13 rounds per second, created a storm of bullets that swept across ship superstructures, killing exposed crew, destroying bridge equipment, starting fires, and generally creating chaos that prevented effective response. Japanese ships under attack by these modified B-25s found themselves in impossible situations. If they maintained course and speed, they presented predictable targets for skip bombs and made it easier for attacking aircraft to aim sustained gunfire. If they maneuvered, they might evade bombs, but remained vulnerable to gunfire and potentially exposed themselves to follow-up attacks by additional aircraft. Anti-aircraft fire could drive off or destroy attacking aircraft, but the attackers approached so fast and so low that engagement windows were brief, and the volume of incoming fire from multiple aircraft often overwhelmed defensive gunners. Ships caught by coordinated attacks from several modified B-25s typically suffered severe damage or sank. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea in early March 1943 provided the definitive demonstration of what guns' innovations could achieve. A Japanese convoy attempting to reinforce Lae in New Guinea was intercepted by Allied aircraft, including modified B-25s, employing skip bombing and low-altitude strafing tactics. Over several days of attacks, Allied aircraft sank all 8 Japanese transports and 4 escorting destroyers, while suffering minimal losses themselves. Thousands of Japanese soldiers drowned or were killed during the attacks. The victory was so complete that Japanese commanders subsequently became much more cautious about moving convoys within range of Allied land-based aircraft, effectively conceding control of the sea lanes in the region to the Allies. The significance of this victory extended beyond the immediate tactical results. It validated guns' concepts so thoroughly that official skepticism evaporated. Orders came down to modify additional B-25s to the Commerce destroyer configuration. Training programs were established to teach pilots the specialized techniques required for effective low-altitude attacks. Armament specialists systematized the modification process so that guns could be installed more quickly and reliably. What had been an improvised field modification became a standardized variant of the B-25, officially recognized and supported by the highest levels of command. General Kenny, who had supported guns' experiments even when others remained skeptical, became an enthusiastic advocate for the modified B-25s. He recognized that Gunn had solved a critical tactical problem through innovation that emerged from practical understanding rather than theoretical analysis. Kenny's support ensured that resources were allocated to continue modifications, that pilots received proper training, and that the tactics developed in the Southwest Pacific were documented and shared with other theaters. Gunn himself was promoted and recognized for his contributions, though his primary concern remained freeing his family from Japanese captivity, a goal not achieved until liberation of the Philippines in 1945. The evolution of Gunn's modifications continued throughout the war. As experience accumulated, refinements were made to gun mounting systems, ammunition feed mechanisms, and firing synchronization. Some aircraft received additional armament in the form of rockets or larger caliber weapons for specific missions. The 14-gun configuration represented the apex of this evolution, a B-25 so heavily armed that it could sustain fire that physically broke enemy ships apart through sheer volume of hits. Pilots who flew these aircraft described the sensation of firing all guns simultaneously as feeling like the aircraft was pushing backward through the air, so substantial was the combined recoil. The crews who operated these modified B-25s developed specialized skills and esprit de corps. They were not conventional bomber crews performing strategic bombing missions, but rather low-altitude attack specialists conducting what was essentially maritime interdiction through direct fire weapons. The role was dangerous. Flying at mast height toward enemy ships meant accepting risks that bomber doctrine normally sought to avoid, but also exciting and tactically decisive in ways that high-altitude bombing rarely achieved. Crews could see the immediate results of their attacks, watch their fire tear into enemy vessels, observe ships sinking or burning, and know definitively that they had accomplished their mission. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was severe. Sailors who survived attacks by Gunn's commerce destroyers reported the terror of watching aircraft approach at wave-top level, seeing the concentration of gun muzzles aimed directly at them, and then experiencing the devastating effect of sustained fire as ships were riddled with bullets. Some Japanese convoy commanders became so fearful of these attacks that they refused to sail during daylight in waters where Allied aircraft might operate. severely constraining their logistical flexibility. The tactical dominance that the modified B-25s achieved contributed significantly to the isolation and eventual defeat of Japanese forces throughout the Southwest Pacific. The story of Pappy Gunn's 14-gun B-25 monster illustrates several fundamental themes about military innovation: the relationship between doctrine and practical necessity, and how individual initiative can transform organizational capabilities even within hierarchical military structures. The first theme concerns the tension between established doctrine and tactical innovation. Military doctrine exists for good reasons. It represents accumulated wisdom about how to employ forces effectively, provides standardized procedures that enable coordinated operations, and prevents the chaos that would result if every unit operated according to its own principles. But doctrine can also become rigid, especially when it reflects technological or tactical conditions that have changed. The pre-war bomber doctrine that emphasized high-altitude precision bombing was based on assumptions about accuracy, defensive capabilities, and target types that proved incorrect when tested in combat. Gunn's innovation challenged bomber doctrine fundamentally. The idea that bombers should operate at low altitude, deliberately closing with enemy forces rather than attacking from safe distance, and employing direct fire weapons rather than gravity bombs, contradicted nearly everything bomber doctrine prescribed. From a doctrinal perspective, Gunn's proposals seem to misunderstand the bomber's role. Bombers weren't fighters or ground attack aircraft. They weren't supposed to dogfight or strafe. Converting them to perform these roles wasted their strategic bombing capabilities. These objections were logical within the framework of established doctrine, but ignored the reality that doctrine wasn't solving the tactical problem at hand. The resolution came through practical demonstration. Gunn couldn't win the argument through appeals to doctrine because his ideas violated doctrine. He could only validate his concepts by showing they worked in combat. This required actually modifying aircraft and conducting missions before official approval was secured, a risky approach that could have ended his career if results had been poor. The success of his modified aircraft forced doctrinal revision, a bottom-up change driven by tactical necessity rather than top-down analysis by doctrine writers. This pattern recurs throughout military history. Innovators challenge established practices, face institutional resistance, validate their ideas through practical success, and force organizational adaptation. The second theme involves the importance of technical knowledge and hands-on experience in developing tactical innovations. Gunn was not a theorist or staff officer analyzing problems abstractly. He was a pilot and mechanic who understood aircraft systems intimately from years of maintaining civilian aircraft under difficult conditions. This practical knowledge let him envision modifications that theoretically trained officers might consider impossible. He knew what structural elements could be altered, what weight additions the airframe could handle, how ammunition feed systems could be routed through constrained spaces, and how electrical systems could be modified to control multiple weapons. This technical competence was essential to translating vision into reality. Modern military organizations increasingly recognize the value of technical expertise at tactical levels, but during World War II, this was less established. Officers were expected to understand tactics and strategy, while enlisted specialists handled technical matters. Gunn bridged this divide through his unusual background, combining pilot qualifications with mechanical expertise and operational understanding. His ability to communicate effectively with both officers, making tactical decisions, and enlisted men implementing modifications was crucial to the innovation's success. He could explain to commanders why his ideas would work and show mechanics how to execute the modifications. The third theme concerns the role of desperation and urgency in driving innovation. The Southwest Pacific in 1942-1943 was a theater where American forces were barely holding on, undersupplied and outnumbered, trying to stop Japanese expansion with inadequate resources. This desperation created openness to unconventional ideas that might not have been entertained in less urgent circumstances. Commanders like General Kenny were willing to support experiments because conventional approaches weren't working and they needed solutions urgently. This urgency overcame bureaucratic inertia and allowed innovations to be tested rapidly rather than languishing in evaluation processes. The relationship between desperation and innovation is complex. Desperate circumstances can prompt creative thinking by removing the luxury of conservatism. When current approaches are failing, trying something new becomes less risky than continuing failed practices. But desperation can also lead to poorly conceived changes adopted without adequate evaluation. The key difference is whether innovations are based on sound technical understanding and tactical reasoning, as Gunn's were, or represent wild gambles without solid foundations. Gunn succeeded partly because his innovations, while unconventional, were based on correct analysis of the problems he sought to solve. The fourth theme involves the mathematics and physics of close-range combat. When Gunn proposed attacking ships at extremely low altitude with concentrated forward firepower, he was applying principles that were sound but unfamiliar to bomber crews trained for high-altitude operations. At low altitude, several factors worked in the attacker's favor. First, time to target was minimal. An aircraft traveling at 250 miles per hour covers approximately 367 feet per second, meaning the distance from initial visual acquisition to weapon release might be traversed in just seconds, giving defenders minimal time to react. Second, skip bombing exploited physics that made bombs delivered at low altitude and proper angle bounce across water surfaces like skipping stones, arriving at targets with forward velocity that increased penetration. Third, concentrated machine gun fire delivered from close range meant that a high percentage of rounds hit their targets rather than missing as they would from altitude. The ballistics of 50 caliber machine guns at close range were devastating. Each round carried approximately 13,000 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, sufficient to penetrate light armor and cause severe damage to unarmored structures. 14 guns firing simultaneously could deliver approximately 180 rounds per second, each capable of killing personnel, destroying equipment, or starting fires. A 3-second burst from all guns would put 540 rounds into a target area, creating damage that accumulated far faster than crews could respond. Ships hit by such fire often lost command and control capabilities within seconds, as bridge personnel were killed or wounded and communications equipment destroyed. The fifth theme concerns the psychological dimensions of warfare and how they interact with tactical effectiveness. Japanese sailors facing attacks by Gunn's modified B25s experienced a unique kind of terror. High-altitude bombing was frightening but impersonal. Bombs fell from distant aircraft and survival often depended on luck rather than individual action. The modified B-25s approaching at wave-top level created a different psychological dynamic. Sailors could see the aircraft clearly, watch them approach, count the gun muzzles aimed at their ship, and know that in seconds they would be under direct fire attack. This visibility and directness of threat created psychological stress that degraded performance even before shooting began. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate terror to broader effects on Japanese maritime logistics. After the Battle of the Bismarck Sea and subsequent devastating attacks, Japanese convoy commanders became increasingly reluctant to sail within range of Allied land-based aircraft. This forced them to route convoys along more circuitous paths, use night transit when possible, and generally operate with caution that reduced logistical efficiency. Ships that spent extra days at sea consumed more fuel, exposed themselves to submarine attack for longer periods, and delivered supplies later than planned. The psychological effect of Gunn's commerce destroyers thus multiplied their tactical impact by changing enemy behavior throughout the theater. The sixth theme involves the question of risk and how it was assessed differently by various actors. From the perspective of conventional doctrine, Gunn's low-altitude tactics were unnecessarily risky. Flying at 50 to 200 feet toward enemy ships bristling with anti-aircraft weapons maximized the aircraft's vulnerability. A single lucky hit could bring down a bomber that would have been relatively safe at 15,000 feet. Crews flying these missions accepted risks that bomber doctrine sought to minimize. Yet from Gunn's perspective, the risks were acceptable given the potential rewards. A single modified B-25 could achieve effects against shipping that might require dozens of conventional bombing sorties, making the risk-reward calculation favorable despite absolute risk being higher. The debate about acceptable risk in military operations has no objective resolution because it depends on values and priorities that vary among individuals and organizations. Conservative commanders prioritize force preservation and view high-risk operations as imprudent unless absolutely necessary. Aggressive commanders accept higher casualties if operations promise decisive results. Gunn's approach fell into the latter category, He was willing to accept significant risks to achieve decisive tactical effects. The success of his tactics validated his risk assessment, but the same calculations might have led to different conclusions if missions had failed or losses had been prohibitive. The seventh theme concerns the role of personal motivation in driving innovation and risk-taking. Gunn's family situation, his wife and children held in Japanese internment camps, gave him intensely personal reasons to want Japanese forces defeated. This motivation likely influenced his willingness to pursue dangerous tactics and his persistence in the face of institutional skepticism. He wasn't just a professional soldier following orders, but a man fighting to free his family, which provided emotional drive that pure professionalism might not have generated. This personal dimension of warfare, the ways individual circumstances influence decisions and behavior, is often overlooked in analyses that focus on strategy and tactics as if they were games played with abstract pieces, rather than activities involving human beings with families, fears, and aspirations. The question of how personal motivations affect military performance is complex. In Gunn's case, his family situation arguably improved his effectiveness by providing extra motivation. But personal concerns can also distract from duties, impair judgment, or lead to reckless behavior. Military organizations generally try to separate professional and personal spheres, expecting soldiers to perform their duties regardless of personal circumstances. Yet this separation is never complete, and the most effective warriors often have personal stakes in the conflicts they fight. Gunn's story illustrates how personal and professional motivations can align to produce exceptional contributions. The practical implementation of Gunn's vision required solving numerous technical challenges, developing specialized tactics, and training crews in procedures that differed fundamentally from conventional bomber operations. Understanding these solutions provides insight into how military innovations are realized in practice and how individual insights become organizational capabilities. The first challenge involved gun installation itself. The B25's nose section normally housed a bombardier with a Norden bomb sight, plexiglass panels for visibility, and limited defensive armament. Converting this space to accommodate multiple forward-firing machine guns required removing the bombardier position and bomb sight, reinforcing the nose structure to handle firing stresses, and creating mounting systems for weapons. Early modifications used available materials and improvised mounting brackets. As the modifications became standardized, more sophisticated mounting systems were developed that provided precise alignment and robust support. The package gun installation that became standard in later B25 variants placed 4 50 caliber machine guns in an external pod beneath the nose. This design allowed the guns to be installed and maintained relatively easily while providing good fields of fire. Additional guns were mounted in the nose itself, with careful attention to weight distribution and structural stress. Some configurations added guns in cheek positions on the fuselage sides just behind the nose, further increasing forward firepower. The 14-gun configuration represented the maximum practical armament, beyond which additional weapons would have compromised aircraft performance unacceptably. Each gun installation required ammunition supply systems capable of feeding hundreds of rounds reliably during combat. The 50 caliber machine gun fired from belts of ammunition, typically loaded in boxes positioned near the weapons. In the constrained spaces of the B25 nose, routing these belts from ammunition boxes to guns while preventing jams required careful design. Ammunition boxes had to be secured against the vibrations and G-forces of low-altitude maneuvering. Feed chutes needed to allow smooth movement of ammunition belts without kinks or sharp bends that would cause jams. The system had to work reliably when all guns fired simultaneously, a condition that generated heat, vibration, and recoil forces that could disrupt poorly designed feed systems. Electrical and mechanical systems for controlling the guns presented another challenge. The pilot needed to fire all weapons simultaneously using cockpit controls, which required electrical firing circuits or mechanical linkages connecting trigger switches to each gun. These systems had to be reliable under combat conditions and simple enough that pilots could operate them without complex procedures. Early systems were relatively crude, but as experience accumulated, more sophisticated firing controls were developed that allowed pilots to select which guns to fire and to manage ammunition expenditure more precisely. The recoil from 14 50 caliber machine guns firing simultaneously was substantial. Each gun produced approximately 25 pounds of recoil force, meaning 14 guns generated roughly 350 pounds of backward force on the aircraft when all fired together. This force pushed the aircraft's nose upward and reduced forward speed slightly, effects that pilots had to compensate for while maintaining accurate aim. The solution involved anticipating these effects during the approach to target, positioning slightly below and fast, so that recoil forces pushed the aircraft into optimal firing position rather than disrupting aim. This required practice and developed intuitive sense of the aircraft's behavior under fire. The second major challenge involved developing skip bombing techniques that maximized effectiveness. Skip bombing required releasing bombs at extremely low altitude, typically 50 to 200 feet, while traveling at specific speeds and angles that would cause bombs to skip across water surfaces and strike ships at or near the waterline. If bombs were released too high or too fast, they would shatter on water impact. If released too low or too slow, they might not skip effectively. Finding the optimal parameters required experimentation and careful observation of results. The physics of skip bombing were complex. When a bomb traveling horizontally struck water at shallow angle, it could bounce much like a flat stone thrown across a pond. The bomb retained forward velocity from the aircraft's motion, allowing it to cover horizontal distance while skipping. After one or more bounces, the bomb would strike the target ship's hull with both forward velocity and any remaining vertical drop, improving penetration compared to bombs that simply fell from altitude. The technique worked best with delayed action fuses that allowed bombs to penetrate hulls before detonating inside ships, maximizing damage. Training programs for skip bombing used practice runs against floating targets in safe waters, allowing pilots to develop skills without combat pressure. Pilots learned to judge altitude precisely, maintain steady speed during final approaches, and release bombs at optimal points. The technique required exceptional flying skill, because errors of even a few feet in altitude or seconds in timing could mean the difference between hits and misses. Pilots also had to maintain steady courses while approaching enemy ships that were shooting back, which required nerve as well as skill. The best skip bombing pilots developed intuitive understanding of the technique, making corrections automatically based on how the aircraft felt rather than relying on conscious calculations. The third challenge involved coordinating skip bombing with strafing to create synergistic effects. The modified B25s would approach targets at low altitude, firing their forward guns continuously while closing to bomb release point. This sustained fire served multiple purposes. It suppressed anti-aircraft fire by forcing enemy gunners to take cover. It inflicted damage to ship superstructures, killing crew and destroying equipment, and it created confusion and chaos that prevented effective response to the primary threat of incoming skip bombs. After bomb release, the aircraft would continue firing while pulling up and away, maximizing time on target while maintaining fire. The timing of this sequence required precise execution. Pilots had to begin firing at ranges where guns were effective, approximately 1,000 yards for 50 caliber weapons, and maintain fire through bomb release and pull-up. Ammunition expenditure had to be managed so guns didn't run dry before the attack was complete. The pull-up maneuver had to be timed to clear the target ship and any masts or superstructure that might strike the aircraft, while maintaining fire as long as possible. Coordinating all these elements while flying at extreme low altitude toward a shooting enemy required intense concentration and extensive training. The fourth challenge concerned defense suppression and survival in the face of anti-aircraft fire. Ships under attack could bring numerous weapons to bear on approaching aircraft. Heavy anti-aircraft guns firing explosive shells, automatic weapons firing solid shot, and even small arms fire from crew. At low altitude, aircraft were vulnerable to all these weapons. The solution involved several elements: attacking at angles that minimized the number of enemy guns that could engage effectively, approaching at speeds that reduced enemy engagement time, coordinating attacks by multiple aircraft to divide enemy fire, and relying on the suppressive effect of incoming gunfire to disrupt enemy gunnery. Multiple aircraft attacking simultaneously created impossible situations for defenders. If 3 modified B25s approached a convoy from different directions, enemy gunners had to divide their attention and fire among multiple threats, reducing effectiveness against any single attacker. The coordination required for such attacks was complex, but achievable with proper planning and communication. Lead aircraft would typically attack first, drawing defensive fire and suppressing anti-aircraft weapons, while follow-on aircraft exploited the disruption to make their own attacks with reduced opposition. This mutual support increased survival rates and overall attack effectiveness. The fifth challenge involved target selection and prioritization. A Japanese convoy might include numerous ships, transports, tankers, escorts, and attacking aircraft had limited time and ammunition. Crews needed to identify high-value targets quickly and focus attacks where they would have maximum effect. Generally, transport ships carrying troops and supplies were primary targets, as sinking them directly degraded Japanese combat power. Escort vessels like destroyers were lower priority unless they posed immediate threat to attacking aircraft. Tankers carrying fuel were valuable targets when identified. Crews learned to make rapid assessments and commit to attacks without second-guessing, as hesitation could mean missing opportunities. The intelligence preparation for missions included detailed briefings on expected convoy composition, ship types and capabilities, and defensive measures likely to be encountered. Reconnaissance aircraft or coast watchers would often provide updated information on convoy positions and courses, allowing attack missions to be planned with reasonable confidence about finding targets. This intelligence integration was crucial because the modified B-25s operated at ranges where fuel margins were tight. Wasting fuel searching for convoys that had diverted or weren't where expected could mean aircraft running out of fuel before returning to base. The sixth challenge concerned maintenance and reliability of heavily modified aircraft. Each modification added complexity and potential failure points. Guns could jam, ammunition feeds could malfunction, electrical firing systems could fail. Structural modifications could create unexpected stresses leading to cracks or failures. Maintaining these aircraft in combat conditions with limited spare parts and facilities required exceptional dedication from ground crews. Armorers checked guns and ammunition systems after each mission, clearing jams and replacing worn components. Mechanics inspected airframes for stress damage and repaired battle damage from enemy fire. The maintenance burden of the modified aircraft was higher than for standard B-25s, but the tactical effectiveness justified the extra effort. The solutions that Gunn and his collaborators developed transformed the B-25 from a medium bomber of limited utility against shipping into a specialized anti-shipping weapon of devastating effectiveness. These solutions weren't perfect. Aircraft were lost, missions failed, and problems occurred, but they represented such dramatic improvement over previous capabilities that the modified B-25s became central to Allied air operations in the Southwest Pacific. The techniques and modifications developed by Gunn's team were eventually documented and taught formally, spreading beyond 5th Air Force to other units and theaters where maritime interdiction missions needed improved approaches. The story of Pappy Gunn's 14-gun B-25 monster, while largely one of successful innovation and tactical effectiveness, deserves critical examination regarding its limitations, costs, and broader implications for military doctrine and innovation processes. The first critique concerns the actual effectiveness of the modifications compared to alternative approaches. While Gunn's Strafer B-25s were undoubtedly more effective against shipping than high-altitude bombers, how did they compare to other anti-shipping methods? Navy dive bombers and torpedo bombers could also sink ships, often with fewer aircraft and lower loss rates. Submarines sank enormous quantities of Japanese shipping throughout the war. The question isn't whether Gunn's innovations worked. They clearly did, but whether they represented the optimal allocation of resources or just a better approach than the inadequate tactics previously employed. This cost-benefit analysis is complicated by the fact that different approaches address different scenarios. Navy carrier aircraft could operate only where carriers were available, which excluded many areas where Gunn's land-based strafers operated. Submarines were highly effective, but operated independently rather than in coordinated strikes that could destroy entire convoys in hours. The Strafer B-25s filled a niche, providing land-based air power capable of devastating attacks on shipping within range of friendly airfields. Whether this niche was important enough to justify the resources invested depends on strategic assessments that are beyond the scope of tactical analysis. The second critique concerns the casualty rates among crews flying the modified aircraft. Low-altitude attacks against defended ships were dangerous, and while precise statistics are difficult to obtain, loss rates for Strafer missions were likely higher than for conventional bomber missions. Families of airmen killed in these operations might reasonably question whether the tactical advantages justified the risks. The military necessity of interdicting Japanese supply lines was clear, but the human cost of achieving this objective deserves recognition beyond celebrating the tactical innovation. The psychological toll on surviving crew members also deserves consideration. Pilots and crew who flew these missions repeatedly experienced intense combat stress, approaching enemy ships at wave-top height, firing continuously while under fire, watching ships break apart under their attacks, pulling up to clear masts with minimal margin. Some crew members undoubtedly developed what we now recognize as PTSD, though in the 1940s, such conditions were poorly understood and rarely treated effectively. The innovation succeeded tactically, but its human costs extended beyond those killed in action to include the psychological damage carried by survivors. The third critique concerns the modification's effect on the B-25's original design mission. By converting medium bombers into strafers, the Army Air Forces reduced the number available for conventional bombing missions. If the strategic situation had required more traditional bomber operations, the modified aircraft would have been poorly suited or required reconversion to standard configuration. This specialization created vulnerability to changing tactical requirements. If Japanese forces had adapted defenses that made low-altitude attacks suicidal, the Strafer B-25s would have been less useful than conventional bombers with greater operational flexibility. This critique raises broader questions about specialization versus flexibility in military aviation. Aircraft designed for specific roles can perform those roles exceptionally well, but struggle when asked to do anything else. General-purpose aircraft perform adequately across multiple mission types, but excel at none. The B-25 Strafer represented an extreme of specialization, optimized for one specific mission profile. That this specialization proved valuable reflected the particular circumstances of the Southwest Pacific Theater, where maritime interdiction was critical. In different theaters or different phases of the war, such specialization might have been counterproductive. The fourth critique concerns whether Gunn's innovations represented genuine tactical brilliance or simply the application of obvious solutions that others had inexplicably overlooked. In retrospect, the idea of attacking ships at low altitude with concentrated forward firepower seems straightforward. Why wasn't this approach developed earlier or independently by others? The answer involves the constraining effects of doctrine, the difficulty of challenging established practices, and the reality that obvious solutions often seem so only after someone has already demonstrated them. But the question remains whether Gunn deserves credit for exceptional innovation or simply for persistent advocacy of sensible ideas that others should have recognized sooner. This question matters for understanding how military innovation occurs and how organizations can better foster it. If Gunn's breakthrough was exceptional individual brilliance, then fostering innovation requires identifying and empowering exceptional individuals. If his success came from questioning doctrine that others accepted uncritically, then fostering innovation requires creating cultures that encourage constructive challenge of established practices. The reality is probably a mixture. Gunn had specific expertise and perspectives that helped him see solutions others missed, but the solutions were potentially discoverable by many people if they had thought to question conventional approaches. The fifth critique concerns the extent to which Gunn's innovations influenced later developments in military aviation. The Strafer B-25 was a product of its time and circumstances, adapted to the specific conditions of Pacific maritime warfare in 1942 to 1944. Modern attack aircraft bear little resemblance to Gunn's creations, employing fundamentally different weapons, sensors, and tactics. Did Gunn's innovations contribute meaningfully to the evolution of military aviation, or were they a tactical dead end that worked temporarily but left no lasting legacy? The answer is nuanced. The specific configuration of the Strafer B-25 had no direct descendants. Modern aircraft don't mount 1450 caliber machine guns in their noses. But the broader principles that Gunn demonstrated, using aircraft as direct-fire weapons platforms, attacking at low altitude to maximize effectiveness, specializing aircraft for specific mission profiles, did influence later developments. Attack helicopters, close air support aircraft, and specialized anti-shipping platforms all reflect some of the same thinking that Gunn applied to the B-25. His innovations were part of a broader evolution rather than revolutionary breakthroughs, but they contributed to changing how air forces thought about employing aircraft against surface targets. The sixth critique concerns ethical dimensions of the attacks enabled by Gunn's modifications. The Strafer B-25s killed thousands of Japanese sailors, many of whom died horribly, burned, drowned, or torn apart by machine gun fire. These were not combat deaths in fair fights, but slaughters where victims had limited ability to defend themselves or escape. The military necessity of cutting Japanese supply lines was clear, but the specific means by which this was accomplished, attacking ships at close range with overwhelming firepower, created suffering that deserves acknowledgement, even when accepting that the attacks were legitimate acts of war. This ethical complexity extends to questions about proportionality and the laws of war. Ships under attack were legitimate military targets, and the attacks complied with international law as it existed at the time. But the brutality of the attacks, the concentrated machine gun fire that killed sailors at their posts, the skip bombs that exploded inside ships giving crew no time to abandon vessel, created suffering that might trouble moral sensibilities, even while accepting legal permissibility. Modern discussions of military ethics increasingly grapple with questions about how killing is accomplished, not just whether killing is justified. And Gunn's Strafer attacks exemplify situations where legally permissible actions nonetheless raise moral questions about unnecessary suffering. The seventh critique concerns the narrative of individual heroism and how it sometimes obscures collective contributions. The story of Gunn's innovations is often told as a tale of one man's vision overcoming institutional resistance, which has dramatic appeal but oversimplifies reality. Gunn didn't work alone. He relied on mechanics, armorers, pilots, commanders who provided support, and many others whose names are forgotten but whose contributions were essential. Celebrating Gunn's achievements shouldn't erase recognition of these collective efforts. This observation applies broadly to military history, which often focuses on individual heroes and commanders, while minimizing the contributions of ordinary soldiers, sailors, and airmen whose collective efforts actually determined outcomes. Gunn was undoubtedly important, but his innovations succeeded because many people worked together to implement them. A more complete history would acknowledge these collective contributions while still recognizing Gunn's leadership and vision as catalysts that made everything else possible. The transformation of the B-25 Mitchell from a conventional medium bomber into Pappy Gunn's 14-gun monster represents one of World War II's most dramatic examples of tactical innovation driven by practical necessity and implemented through individual initiative. When Gunn first proposed his modifications, skeptical officers saw only violations of established doctrine and questionable use of limited resources. They ignored his beam gap sniper angle, his unconventional vision for how bombers could be employed against shipping, until combat results made ignoring him impossible. Once his modified B-25s began shredding Japanese convoys across the Pacific, devastating attacks that sent entire convoys to the bottom in single missions, official recognition and support followed rapidly. The arc of this story, initial dismissal, persistent advocacy, dramatic validation, eventual acceptance, appears repeatedly in military history. Innovators who challenge established practices face institutional resistance regardless of their ideas' merit, because institutions are structured to resist change. Only undeniable success forces recognition, and achieving that success often requires risk-taking that organizations normally discourage. Gunn succeeded partly through his own determination and skill, but also because he operated in a theater and under commanders who were desperate enough to support experiments that might otherwise have been suppressed. The human dimensions of Gunn's story add depth beyond simple tactical innovation. His family remained imprisoned by the Japanese throughout the period when he was developing and employing his modifications, providing intensely personal motivation for his work. He was fighting not just for abstract strategic objectives, but to hasten the defeat of forces holding his loved ones captive. This personal stake likely influenced his willingness to pursue dangerous tactics and his persistence in the face of skepticism. When the Philippines were finally liberated in 1945, Gunn's family was freed from internment, though they had suffered significantly during their captivity. Gunn himself survived the war, promoted to colonel and recognized for his contributions, but died in a flying accident in 1957, his post-war life quieter than his wartime achievements. The crews who flew Gunn's Strafer B-25s demonstrated exceptional courage, repeatedly executing attacks that required flying toward enemy ships at wave-top height while under fire. These men knew the risks they accepted. Low-altitude attacks offered no margin for error, and anti-aircraft fire could destroy aircraft with single lucky hits. Yet they pressed home attacks mission after mission, achieving results that strategic bombing could never have accomplished against maritime targets. Many died in the process, shot down by anti-aircraft fire, killed by mechanical failures, or lost to the unforgiving Pacific when damaged aircraft couldn't reach friendly bases. Their courage and sacrifice enabled the tactical innovation to fulfill its potential. The Japanese sailors who faced these attacks experienced terror that survivors described decades later. Accounts from Japanese sources describe the horror of watching multiple aircraft approach at extremely low altitude, seeing the concentration of gun muzzles aimed at their ships, and then experiencing the devastating effect as sustained fire swept across decks and superstructures. Ships broke apart under the combined effect of skip bombs exploding at waterlines and machine gun fire that destroyed everything above deck. Survivors floated in oil-covered water, sometimes under continued strafing as aircraft made multiple passes, waiting for rescue that often never came. These men were victims of effective military tactics, but their suffering was real and deserves acknowledgement even when accepting the attack's military necessity. The broader impact of guns' innovations extended beyond specific missions or ships sunk. The transformation of the B25 from a strategic bomber into a maritime interdiction weapon represented a reconceptualization of how air power could be applied to naval warfare. Pre-war doctrine had envisioned aircraft attacking ships primarily through high-altitude bombing, a method that combat demonstrated was largely ineffective. Guns' approaches proved that aircraft could devastate shipping through low-altitude direct attack, fundamentally changing the tactical equation. This influenced not just how the B-25 was employed, but how military planners thought about aircraft roles and capabilities more broadly. The validation of guns' concepts had strategic implications for the Pacific War. Japanese forces throughout the Southwest Pacific depended on maritime supply lines for everything from ammunition to food. By making these supply lines untenable through sustained attacks on convoys, Allied air forces contributed significantly to isolating and weakening Japanese garrisons. Bases that couldn't be resupplied became progressively less capable of resistance, making them easier targets for eventual Allied invasions. The maritime interdiction campaign, to which guns strafer B-25s contributed substantially, was arguably as important strategically as the island hopping campaign that receives more historical attention. For modern military professionals, Gunn's story offers lessons about innovation, institutional learning, and the relationship between doctrine and practical effectiveness. Organizations need mechanisms for recognizing when established practices aren't working and for incorporating innovations that challenge conventional thinking. This requires balance. Not every unconventional idea deserves support, but dismissing ideas solely because they contradict doctrine means missing innovations that could prove decisive. The challenge is distinguishing between valuable innovation and well-meaning but counterproductive experimentation, a distinction that often becomes clear only through practical testing. The technical lessons from Gunn's modifications remain relevant despite vast changes in aviation technology. The principles he applied, concentrating firepower, attacking from angles that maximize friendly advantages while minimizing enemy capabilities, specializing weapons platforms for specific mission profiles, still guide modern military aviation. Contemporary attack aircraft employ these principles through technologies and tactics unimaginable in the 1940s, but the underlying logic persists. Gunn's Strasser B-25s were ancestors of modern gunships and attack helicopters, not through direct lineage, but through shared tactical DNA. The story's emotional resonance comes from its human elements. The middle-aged civilian turned military innovator, fighting to free his family while transforming how aerial warfare was conducted. The young air crews who flew his modified aircraft into desperate battles. The enemy sailors who died under attacks they couldn't effectively counter. The commanders who had to balance risk against potential reward when deciding whether to support unconventional tactics. These human dimensions make the story more than just a technical case study in tactical innovation. They make it a narrative about courage, determination, loss, and the strange mixtures of hope and horror that characterize warfare. The forgotten or overlooked aspect of the story concerns the mechanics, armorers, and engineers who actually implemented Gunn's vision. While Gunn provided the conceptual framework and leadership, these skilled technicians solved the practical problems of mounting guns, routing ammunition feeds, reinforcing structures, and making electrical systems work reliably. They worked under difficult field conditions with limited resources, often improvising solutions to problems that had no established procedures. Their technical competence transformed Gunn's vision from theoretical possibility to operational reality. Military history often overlooks these behind-the-scenes contributors, but their work was essential to the innovation's success. The legacy of Pappy Gunn's 14-gun B25 monster extends beyond specific tactical achievements to broader questions about how military organizations innovate and adapt. His success demonstrated that valuable innovations can emerge from unexpected sources, that practical knowledge and field experience sometimes generate insights that theoretical analysis misses, and that persistence in the face of institutional skepticism can be vindicated when ideas prove themselves in combat. These lessons remain relevant for any organization that must adapt to changing circumstances, while managing the tension between maintaining effective practices and incorporating necessary changes. The world initially ignored Pappy Gunn's vision of a heavily armed B25 monster that would attack shipping at wave-top height, combining skip bombing with devastating forward firepower. The concept violated established bomber doctrine and seemed impractical to officers trained in conventional approaches. Then, Gunn's modified aircraft began shredding Japanese convoys across the Pacific, achieving results that strategic bombing never could against maritime targets. And everything changed. The tactical innovation that headquarters had dismissed became a standard weapon in the Southwest Pacific Theater, eventually incorporated into official doctrine and employed by units throughout the region. The Strafer B25, Gunn's monster, had proven itself in the only court that ultimately matters in warfare: combat effectiveness. The ship sent to the bottom, and the Japanese garrisons isolated by maritime interdiction testified to the innovation's success more eloquently than any after-action report could capture.